Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm your host Rebecca and I recap live trials. Except I've already recapped what happened on Thursday in the Chad Daybell case. And they're on today on the stand are Chad's kids. I will recap that for you tomorrow. But you know what? I'm okay. You know why? I'm drowning in yarn. I'm okay. Anyway, so I have a true crime story for you today. This is a story of Alpine Manor Nursing Home. This is a case that is 37 years old. It's happened in 1987. For you young people, that's a very long time ago. For me, not so long ago. Feels like yesterday. Who doesn't miss the 80s, right? Great music. Anyway, this is a 208 bed nursing home in Walker, Michigan. This is a little suburb outside of Grand Rapids, Michigan. And at the time of these murders, it was very difficult to get into there weren't a lot of these homes that provided this full service care for people that were just completely could not care for themselves. And this was one of them. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the victims in this case. And there were 5. They think at one point they were investigating up to 12. But the problem is by the time these murders came to light, out of those 12 victims, most of them had been cremated. So there was nothing to exhume, but they were able to exhume a couple of bodies. So the prosecutors knew they could charge one of the 2 people responsible for the murders of two of these victims. So I'll tell you about the victim, Marguerite Chambers. She was married to a guy named Ed. She suffered from Alzheimer's disease that was diagnosed at the age of 42 years old. I mean, how awful. So by the mid 80s, she was not doing well. He couldn't care for her anymore. He had retired from his job, took early retirement, cashed out his pension so he could take care of her, but he couldn't do it anymore. So he put her on a list. So he waited 2 years to get her into this Alpine nursing home. And it just happened to be 3 blocks from his house. So he would go and visit this woman every single day. And by the mid 80s, she could no longer walk or talk, but she would just sit in her bed and rock. That's what I'm going to do when I get old. I'm just going to rock. I'm going to be crocheting and rocking. Don't talk to me. Just keep me with yarn and a hook. But when Ed would come to visit her, she would stop rocking. Like she knew who he was. Isn't that weird? Yeah, it's very sweet. Another one of the victims was Myrtle Lewis. She was 95 years old. She had organic brains syndrome. Then there was a Mae Mason, who was 76 years old, and she had Alzheimer's. Are you seeing a theme here? Yeah, people that just couldn't care for themselves were not able to tell anybody what was going on. Who were the other ones? Oh, Edith Cook was one of them. She was 97 years old. Very, very sad. How many is that? Anyway, we'll get to all the victims. So this involves 2 people, Kathy Woods and Gwen Graham. So let me tell you about Kathy. Kathy both of these women are psychologically or were a mess, just a wreck. And Kathy married a man named Ken. She got pregnant when she was 17 years old. And she would always tell him these bizarre stories of her growing up, like how she fell in love with this guy next door. that she thought was a guy, and she slept with him, and it turned out to be a girl and not a guy. And like, who knows if that's a true story. But she was 6 foot tall. She had always struggled with her weight. By the time she gave birth to the daughter that she was pregnant with at 17, she weighed 450 pounds. Yeah. 6 foot tall. So, she's a big woman. Bleach blonde hair and very intelligent. Quite intelligent. She was interested in being a nurse. So she goes to work. She couldn't stand being at home because when she was married to Ken, she didn't want to leave the house because of her weight. She couldn't find clothes that would fit. She just stayed at home all the time. So she decides she's going to get this job at this nursing home, Alpine Nursing Home. And she worked the night shift. She preferred the 11 to 7, what they called the third shift. So she became very popular. She was very likable. People would talk to her, and she found out very quickly that she could manipulate people to do what she wanted them to do, for her own gain. And then when she would get them to do something, she'd say, "Oh, you're so cute. Yeah, you're so cute." Oh, that's weird. Anyway, so she has this, she doesn't like her daughter. Ken will say that, she just really wasn't much of a mother. She didn't really bond with her daughter. So she goes to work, and these people, they really, really like her. And a lot of these people were gay. And they would go after work, and they would hang out at this bar, and she would go with them. So she fell in love with this woman named Dawn. But let me tell you what, she would start coming home drunk or high. And like, her husband he's like, "What is going on at this nursing home? This is crazy." So he finally, he has enough, and he leaves her. He's like, "No, I can't do this anymore." He takes their daughter. He goes and moves into a hotel. Dawn moves in with her into her house. Yeah. Interesting, huh? So she's having this affair with Dawn, and they nicknamed that shift like the gay shift because everybody was sleeping with everybody. Even the orderlies who were gay were sleeping with each other, and the nurses' aides were sleeping with. It was crazy. Everybody's sleeping with everybody on the shift, and it was just like out of control. They would go to these bars, but the management would say, "Listen, what they do in their free time, we don't have any control." Yeah. So fast forward, in 1986, the nursing home hires this woman named Gwen Graham. She grew up in Texas. Another woman who had issues growing up. Both of these women had issues with their family growing up. Like, don't we all? But to their detriment, to cause this psychological damage. Anyway, Gwen had visions of becoming a paramedic, So she's, very athletically built, 140 pounds, 5'2". She wants to be a paramedic. So she says, I'm going to get a job at this nursing home as a step to becoming a paramedic. I don't know why she just didn't go to paramedic school, but I guess she needed a job because she had moved from Texas up to Michigan. So she gets this job on the night shift. She's hired on the spot. Now, let me tell you, this nursing home, it was set up in 4 wings, and each wing had a nurse's station and a nurse. And then the rest of the place was just these nurses' aides. And they would average about 5 to 10 deaths per month, more if it was flu season, but that was the expected death rate there. Little single story brick place, but they just could not keep people. Let me tell you, I've never done it, but I can tell you, as a former nurse, I was an attorney and a nurse. As a former nurse, registered nurse, I can tell you, I wouldn't do that job. Like, it is the worst job of jobs. These people with Alzheimer's, they can become very violent. You have to take care of every single need these patients have, cleaning them up, feeding them, bathing them. It's just a very, very tough job. My dog is snoring. My sister's dog is snoring. I hope that doesn't pick up. Anyway, so this nursing home, in 1986, they hired 112 nurses aides, and out of those 112, 71 of them left. They had a 60% turnover rate in that particular year. But who stayed on? Kathy and Gwen. Well, Kathy and Gwen become fast friends. Gwen needed a place to stay, so Kathy's like, come stay with us. So Gwen and Kathy start sleeping together. Yeah. So Dawn is like pushed out, and Gwen and Kathy are having, they're lovers now. And they would play these pranks on the, new employees, because there was not a lot of new employees. You want a job, you're hired. Well, these poor employees, they would walk in, like one nurse, for example, one of the nurses' aides, for example, the call light goes off in this room. So she walks into this room, and it's dark, and she's, looking for the light, and she goes next to the bed, and somebody grabs her ankles. So she runs out screaming. Well, it was Gwen. She would do that. She'd hide under the bed. Her and Kathy, they would put people in the bed with their heads at the foot of the bed. And then when they got tired of doing that, they just changed the bed around. They put the footboard near the head, where the headboard was, they would switch rooms altogether. One patient in a different room, just to confuse everybody. Then they would go outside, and because it's 11 to 7, it's dark. They knock on the windows, scare the employees, scare the patients. Just lots of pranks. They would get on the PA system, and they would pick residents that had speech impediments like lisp and stuff, and they would have them make announcements, and then they would laugh and make fun of them. And there was a charge nurse that reported them to management and said, these two are they're trouble when they're together. And management's like, they're fine, because they weren't going anywhere. They wanted people that would stay, and they weren't going to get rid of these two, because they would work extra shifts. They would, they were Johnny on the spot. They were always there. So one of the residents one day, one of these pranks that's not so funny, Kathy Wood was working this day on the night shift. This woman gets a call at home that her mother, Belle Burkhart, is not expected to survive through the day. You need to get here. And she's like, oh my God, I can't call in. I got to work. So she goes through the whole day working, worried about her mom dying. She rushes after work, 3 hours to get to this nursing home. She gets there. Her mom's room is empty. She's like, oh my God. So she goes to the nurse station. Where's my mom? And they're like, we don't know where your mom is. She finds her mom in the dining room. Nothing wrong with her. She's fine. So she helps mom eat. She goes to the nurse's station, and they're like, listen, we didn't call you. They went through the log. There was no calls made to you. They went through mom's nursing home record. There was nothing to indicate she was declining. So, so she's relieved that her mom's not dead, but she's kind of pissed because who called her? They don't know. Like Kathy Woods, she was on duty that night. At the end of 1986, the health department gets a call that the residents are being neglected at this nursing home. And this is a frequent thing, with nursing homes. I defended nursing homes as an attorney for many years. That they'll get a call that residents are being neglected. So they have to go in with inspectors, and they do their inspection, and they came out and they said there was high turnover that year, but the residents were being taken care of. They didn't find any issues. And Graham had even taken like a test to see what her propensity was, or her, how good her skill level was as a nursing aide. And she passed with flying colors, and they were even complimentary of her for her idea of washcloths. She said she would put them in the residents, she would roll them up, put them in the residents' hands, so that their fingernails wouldn't scratch themselves with their fingernails. Yeah. But we're going to find out what she really did with those washcloths. So, and then she was always known for having like one of these rolled up washcloths in her back pocket. So one of the nurses' aides one day was with Kathy, and she said to Kathy, how do you keep this man quiet? Because every time you're in here, he's quiet. When I'm, I can't get him to shut up. She said, how do you keep him quiet? She goes, watch. So she goes over to the guy. She whispers something in his ear, and he shuts up. And the nurse's aide, like, what did you say to him? She says, well, I told him that I'm bigger than him, and I'm, he's not doing so well health-wise, and that I could murder him if he didn't shut up. And the nurse is like, oh, okay. And coincidentally, this resident named Clara, like within a few days, she tells another nursing assistant, this Clara lady, says that people are whispering to her that they're going to kill her. And nobody believed her because they thought, oh, she's got Alzheimer's, nobody's trying to kill her. They just figured it was part of her disease process. Then on Sunday, January 18th of 1987, Marguerite, the person that I talked about, that was married to Ed, had the Alzheimer's at 42, she passes away. She was only 60 years old when she passed away. Unfortunately, when she died that night, they call the doctor, and the doctor says, it's snowing outside. I'm not coming down there. Just send her to the morgue. And then he comes, later on, a few days later, signs the death certificate, heart attack. Okay. Then on February 3rd, Myrtle Lewis, who had organic brain syndrome, which is similar to Alzheimer's, it also evidences itself in the form of dementia. She was found with a bloody nose that day. And the nurse was like, I don't know. When she goes to wipe her off with a washcloth, and the woman's like, no, get away from me with the washcloth. And this is not a woman that was active or lucid or anything. She was normally in bed in a fetal position. The only time she would recognize anybody is if her son would come to visit her, and then she would smile at him and reach out. And, isn't that sweet? Yeah. But 7 days later, February 10th, they find Myrtle deceased. This time she's got mucus all over her nose. And they did find a rolled up washcloth in the bed with her. So also the doctor decides he's not coming. He's not going to come to see why she died. And he has sent her to the morgue. He comes a few days later and puts heart attack as the cause of death. And the family's thinking, heart attack? Well, she was just examined. She had a physical last week, and the doctor wrote that her heart health was impeccable. How'd she have a heart attack? But nobody questioned it. I mean, these, like I said, she was in the fetal position, very, very, very sad. So one day, at this point, Gwen is living with Dawn and Kathy. Dawn hasn't gotten the message yet and left. And she tells Dawn, I killed Myrtle. And Dawn's like, stop. She's like, no, for real. You want to see? Come here, I'll show you. So she takes Dawn into the bedroom, and she shows her a sock. She goes, I keep souvenirs. I kept this as a souvenir. So Dawn didn't think anything of it because she's like, she's always playing jokes on everybody. She said, I didn't take her serious. She says, I just thought it was a sick joke. And that, the sock was probably hers, or maybe she just stole the sock. I don't know. Then on February 16th of 1987, Mae Mason, 76 years old, she is found deceased. And just 2 hours before she had been found, she was being cared for by a nurse's aide named Sean. And Sean was trying to clean her up with the washcloth, and she just was not having it. She's like, nope, stay away from me with the washcloth. Didn't want anything to do with the washcloth. So Sean says, okay, I'm going to come back later. And she has to go over and care for another patient. And 2 hours later, she's deceased. Then on February 17th, Belle Burkhart, the one they made a phone call about, Belle Burkhart, yeah, she was deceased. She was found deceased. She had bruising on her face, and she was known to have had seizures, so they just chalked it up to seizures. They figured that, maybe she had a seizure and she hit her face on the side rails. So again, the doctor with May and Belle came in and said, actually with Belle, they said heart attack. With May, they said cardiopulmonary arrest, which is heart attack. And in Belle's case, she had also had a physical, like a week before that, where the doctor said there was nothing wrong with her heart. And that night, when Belle was found deceased, everyone had been on a break. Kathy had told everybody, Kathy Wood had said, you guys all go on a break. I'll watch the patients. You guys go. And when they come back, they find her deceased. Now, what were these women doing on their breaks? Women and men. There were men too. Gay men, gay women. They were all gossiping and smoking and drinking and and getting into fights. One woman had 2 teeth knocked out. Another one had her ribs fractured. And she actually went to the managers, and the managers are like, what happened? She's like, well, Kathy lured me into the woods, thinking they're going to have sex. And Gwen shows up and beats her up. Yeah. So what happens to Gwen and Kathy? Nothing. Nothing happens to Gwen, but Kathy gets promoted to lead tech. Yeah. So Gwen is not happy. Gwen's thinking, I deserve that promotion, not Kathy. And so this began, then they started arguing with each other all the time. They're always arguing, getting into fights, loud fights that the neighbors could hear, punching holes in the walls, beating each other up. They'd come to the work with bruising all over themselves. So to the point where Gwen just got fed up with it and she moved out. She got a trailer, moved into a trailer park, and took a new girlfriend named Heather, another nurse's aide. So when Kathy found out about this, Kathy goes over there and convinces Gwen to come back to her. So Gwen goes back to her. And when she gets to where Kathy is, Kathy ties her up and then puts a gun where the sun don't shine and then leaves her tied up for 3 hours. And tells her, you better never say anything about what we did, So when she unties her, they agree, okay, we're done. We're finished. So Gwen goes back to her trailer with Heather. And Heather's like, why did you go with her? And Gwen says, she's got something on me. So Kathy, meanwhile, has nowhere to live. She loses her house. She doesn't have any place to live. So she goes back to Ken. And then one night she decides she's going to confess these murders to Ken, her husband. They hadn't divorced yet. And because she was always running back to him. She'd run back to him. He'd think, oh, we're going to get back together. And then she would leave him again for another, to go back to Gwen. And it was usually just because she needed money. She wanted something from him. She was very, very manipulative. She went to a nursing supervisor one time, and she was always confessing stuff to this nursing supervisor. Oh, I'm really upset about this. Can I talk about it? She'd go in and talk to her. So one day she came in and she said she was pregnant. And she's thinking, I thought you were gay. She's pregnant. She wants to get an abortion, but she didn't have any money. So this woman gives her the money to get an abortion. Kathy goes and puts a down payment on a house. Yeah. No abortion. She was never pregnant. Then on April 7th, 97-year-old Edith Cook is found deceased. Edith had been in this nursing home for 6 years. She was a very, very popular resident. The staff just loved her. And the nurse assigned to her that day was Kathy Wood. And Gwen was working on the same ward as Kathy that day. So this is the murder that she confessed to Ken about. She tells Ken, what's the worst thing that I could tell you? Because I really need to tell you something. And he's like, the worst thing, I guess, is that you killed somebody. And she goes, how about times 6? And then she tells him about this murder of Edith Cook. And he's like, well, did you do this because you were trying to ease her pain and suffering? And she's like, no, we just did it for fun. So she went on to explain to him how they would do it. They would roll the washcloths up. And she didn't do it. She wasn't doing these murders. It was Gwen. Gwen would hold that one under their chin and the other one over their nose, 2 of them, I guess, like that, and smother them, basically. And she used the washcloths because they thought it prevented bruising. And what they would do is they would test out different residents to see how they would respond. They would hold their nose to see how they would respond to not breathing. Because if they fought it really hard, then they weren't going to kill them because they didn't want anybody that could fight them back. Their original idea was that they were going to put in this logbook, the logbook of deceased patients. They wanted it to spell out murder, M-U-R-D-E-R. So the first murder was Marguerite, but it became too difficult because to get the other letters, they would have to go after residents that were lucid and active. And that was too difficult. So they just focused on the ones that had Alzheimer's and brain disease and couldn't fight back. So Kathy said she was the lookout and she would distracted. Like if Gwen was working on a different ward, Kathy would distract the nursing supervisor by, telling her a bunch of gossip on her ward to keep the nursing supervisor off the ward where Kathy was committing the murder. Or she would get all the other nursing assistants. If Gwen was on the same ward, she'd get everybody else there, and then she'd start gossiping, and they were all listening to her while Gwen's over committing the murder. Or she would just stand out as lookout. Yeah. Now, the police suspected that she was a little bit more involved than she was letting on, but yeah. So two of the bodies were exhumed. So the next thing that happens is October 6th of 1988. Ken grows a conscience. Hey, shh. Ken grows a conscience. And he decides he's going to report this to the police. Now, he's moved away. He's in a different town. He goes to the town where he's at. He reports it. And the guy's like, well, why didn't you go over to where this happened? And he goes, because by the time I got there, I probably changed my mind. He goes, I've changed my mind dozens of times, but I happened to be driving by and I got up the nerve to come in here. And he says, I didn't report this for the longest time because I thought, well, these people were old and frail and I didn't want their families, their families had already come to terms with their grief over their passing of their loved ones, thinking it was natural, and he didn't want to cause them any anxiety. And so he didn't report it, but he finally did report it. So this officer calls up the correct police department, gets the investigator on the phone and tells him he's just been reported to him, that Gwen and Kathy have committed these murders. So he's like, okay. So he goes to the nursing home and asks Kathy to come down with him to the police station so he can talk to her. And she's like, she doesn't know what he's talking about. Oh, no, I never said that to Ken. I never confessed anything to Ken. And he says, I think you're lying to me. So at that point, her whole demeanor changes and she starts talking. It's all Gwen. Gwen. And this happens over a series of interviews. And this poor police officer, like nobody, they kept saying, she's lying to you. She's manipulating you, because she did a lie detector test. And the guy that was administering the lie detector says she's not telling the truth. He asked her questions of what was the greatest moment in your life? And she said, when my daughter was born. And then he goes, oh no, she changed her mind. No, it's when I met Gwen. And then what was your worst moment in your life? And instead of saying, when these murders were committed or something, she says, when Gwen left me. So he kept this guy was saying, she's doing this to get back at Gwen. There's nothing here. And the prosecutors were saying the same thing, but this officer, he kept pursuing him. And she kept telling him more and more of the story. And he found other witnesses. They exhumed the bodies that they could exhume because the rest had been cremated. And of the two that they exhumed, they really didn't find evidence of strangulation or suffocation, but they did find that there was nothing wrong with their hearts. They didn't die of heart attacks. So the medical examiner changed the death certificates from dying of natural causes to homicide. So they could charge her with at least 2 murders. But, she was confessing to 5. She said there might have been up to 8, but she couldn't remember the names of the other 3. Anyway, so they decide, okay, we're going to do a plea deal here. If you'll testify against Gwen as to all the other murders, we'll recommend a sentence of second-degree murder with the possibility of parole and 1 count of conspiracy. She's like, deal, you got it. So Gwen gets charged with all of these murders, 6 counts of murder. And they go to trial. And they had 3 other nursing aides confess that either Kathy or Gwen had told them about these murders, including Kathy's sister. So 3 nurses' aides and Kathy's sister. Also, remember Gwen, when she broke up with Kathy, was with Heather and they moved to Texas. Heather testified. Yeah, she told me. Heather did. I don't think Heather believed it when she told her. She thought Gwen was just, and she kept telling Gwen, stop talking like that. Don't talk about that. It upset her. And when Heather testified in court and was leaving and got down off the stand and was leaving, Gwen hollered out, I still love you, Heather. And then Kathy, she was on the stand for 2 full days testifying against Gwen. It was all Gwen. So the jury deliberated for 6 hours. They come back guilty on all counts as to Gwen. So Gwen is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole and is currently serving that sentence in a federal prison, or not a federal, in a state prison up in Michigan. Kathy was sentenced to 20 to 40 years in prison with the possibility she would be eligible for parole after 16 years with good behavior. Now, it was found out that she bragged in prison several times to other inmates that she got that bitch back, that she had done the murders. And she got that bitch back. That's what she gets for breaking up with me. Yeah. So Kathy, did she manipulate this whole thing? So anyway, on September of 2018, she goes before the parole board. Now, the families of all these victims They challenged this. They said, no, don't let her out. She's a serial killer. One of the officers thought she was a serial killer, thought she was way more involved than she was letting on, and more active than she admitted. They still said she's no longer a threat to society. We're letting her out. So she had served 30 years. She was 55 years old. 55 years old when she was released in 2018 and went to live with her sister in South Carolina. They were known as the Lethal Lovers, Gwen and Kathy. I want to read to you a letter that they found when they searched Gwen's property, Gwen's trailer. They found a letter from Kathy, and it said, I love you, Gwen. I think you're great. That's when I'll wake up, and that's when I'll kiss you. Oh, let me start over. I love you, Gwen. I think you're great. For this afternoon, I cannot wait. That's when I'll wake up, and that's when I'll kiss you. That's when I'll hold you. Oh, Gwen, I miss you. Bunny hop over here to let me lick you on the ear. Oh, please say you'll be mine forever times 5 days. So she was asked, what does that mean, forever and 5 days? So Shakespeare had coined the phrase forever and a day. So they took that and said every time they committed a murder, they would add a day, forever and 5 days. So apparently this was written after 5 of the murders. So, yeah, interesting story. So Kathy's out. She's living in South Carolina, I think. I don't know. Maybe she's moved by now. Who knows? Here's a picture of what she looks like now. Or this is what she looked like when she got out. Yeah, scary. No more bleached blonde hair. Anyway, have a great day, everybody. Thank you for watching, and I will see you tomorrow with the beginning of the Chad Daybell defense case. The kids are going to be taking the stand today. Have a great day, everybody. Bye.